Do you want to know why gentle parenting doesn't work? Well, we're going to talk about that. Gentle parenting was a really popular trend for a while. I even made videos on my channel with the term gentle parenting in it because I could see the trend was coming. I was concerned about it. I could see that it was going to be causing some problems, and I wanted some people to maybe get drawn over to something that really would work, that was gentle, but would also help empower their children instead of disempower them, which is one thing that gentle parenting does. So let's talk about gentle parenting, maybe even add in some information about teaching self-government so that you can see the difference between a type of parenting that does work and that is effective and one that does not. I know a lot of people think that a parenting approach, some work for some children, some work for others. That is not necessarily true. If your parenting approach is principled, it should work for everyone who actually really does it, applies themselves, lives according to the principles and stuff. The teaching self-government approach to parenting has actually really proven itself. It's been used in treatment facilities with troubled youth, in foster homes, in regular families, in shelters, in business environments, in recovery centers for people who were trafficked, lots of different places who use the teaching self-government skills and principles in order to help people. So how come the gentle parenting movement then is kind of on its way out? What's going on there? Well, the big thing that's happening is people have noticed that this emotional validation approach that gentle parenting takes is not as helpful as they thought it would be. I think people assumed that if you just talk to a person about their emotions after everything, like, oh, you don't want to get dressed this morning and you've had a meltdown, let's talk about your meltdown, let's talk about all your feelings, that somehow this would bring awareness to a person because they're trying to accomplish what Dr. Daniel Goleman talked about in his book, Emotional Intelligence. But his book was actually pretty much on target. The way that people have interpreted what to do because of his book was actually, I think, missing the mark. So his book, in there, he talked about how a person has a feeling, then they have a split second for a thought, then they have an emotion based upon the thought. That means the thought could change. That means the thought actually influences the outcome of the emotion. So that makes a big difference. And what a lot of people are doing, especially with the gentle parenting movement, is they're saying, listen, you feel emotions, we need to discuss that. We need to hash that. What the teaching self-government approach says is, okay, you feel emotions, that means something needs to be handled, but what thought did you have before the emotion? Was there any other thought that could have been true? Should we challenge this thought? Is it helping you? Is it productive thought or a non-productive thought? Where are you at with that? Those types of questions are not questions that come up in the gentle parenting movement because the focus is on validation. Validation is not a principle that helps a person become more free and self-governed. This doesn't mean that you don't ever validate a person. You can say, yes, you feel that, you're explaining that, that's great. But the real principles come in when you say, okay, now how do we take steps from here? Where do we go from here? What type of a person ought we to be? There's actually a moral component. There's a right, wrong, good, bad, true, false that needs to be factored in. In the gentle parenting approach, right, wrong, good, bad, true, false don't seem to be talked about that much. It's just how you feel. It's just your state. And it's almost as if your state is what is right or true, which just because you feel something doesn't mean you're feeling a truth, or doesn't mean that it's going to be good for you to give in to that feeling. In fact, it usually encourages a lot of emotional entitlement and emotional vomiting. The parents really get worn out too because they're trying to be calm with their children and talk to the children and not emotionally react when the children are emotionally reacting. But soon, teaching all of that emotional entitlement to the children ends up creating emotional entitlement for the parents. So now we've got a whole bunch of emotional needs and people who are feeling like they're they're not getting their needs met. Now that's one of the big focuses for gentle parenting, is we've got to find the unmet need. Now that sounds like a really good thing to do, and I'm not opposed to finding unmet needs, but sometimes we don't need to turn one emotional outburst, which could be manipulative, lazy, entitled, there's a lot of reasons why people could have an emotional outburst. We shouldn't turn every single one of those into a huge psychological process that we have to go through, because that makes a person actually feel like they're broken. I think this movement has created a lot of emotional young people who feel entitled to have everything go their way, to be completely understood no matter what, and they think they're broken and that everyone around them is a mean and a bully and whatever if they don't take the time to understand them and see things their way. And guess what? That's not life. I mean, if you just think of politics, okay? In politics, there's different views on things, of this issue, this party versus this party, okay? There's going to be differences. The point is that there's differences. That's the point. That's where freedom comes, is when people share their views and they have different views. And then they find themselves at a place where hopefully they can solve a problem because they found something they could agree upon, which usually comes back to the principle. That's the beautiful thing. But if we say to our children, if somebody doesn't agree with you, if somebody doesn't understand you, they're not a good person, they're not a good friend, and all of those things, then we're actually creating isolation for our child. The problems can't be solved. The principles aren't found. Everything gets stuck. So that's probably the biggest reason that gentle parenting is not working, is the people are ending up emotionally stuck. And the parents are not figuring out how to teach their children basic skills because the emotions keep getting in the way. They're teaching them one emotional skill, which is how to identify their emotion or how to express their emotion. I guess that's two emotional skills. But other than that, it's up to everybody else to figure out why this has happened to the child. And the child then ends up going, well, because I felt an emotion, I shouldn't have to do whatever it is. And so then it's almost a fluke if a child chooses to take on adult responsibilities. And if the parents start suggesting that they take on adult responsibilities, then what happens is the child ends up getting very, very combative. Don't expect me to take responsibilities now. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you're 17 though, or you're 18. Now you've got to move out. Now you've got to get a job. Now you've got to do things. But at that point, if you've trained the child to say, you can't tell me what to do. I have a feeling, and this is what I feel like, this is what I want. If you've entitled them by caving into that all the time, then they struggle. I'm friends with a family where one parent uses teaching self-government and the other parent attempts to use gentle parenting. The parent that is using teaching self-government gets greater outcomes than the parent that is using gentle parenting approach. The parent using gentle parenting is like, oh, this is so draining. How do you keep up with all of this? And they're constantly thinking that their children just need more understanding, when then the children aren't taking any responsibility. The children are walking all over the parents. The parents, well, this one parent is giving the child anything that they want because they see the child as a victim of the other parent, because the other parent is trying to teach them responsibility and skills for life. And you know what's so funny is when this other parent teaches them responsibility and skills for life, and when the other parent happens to not be around in order to rescue the child, that child actually does really well. So is it good for that child to be emotionally coddled in this way? I would say no. The poor child is now starting to think that he shouldn't have to do anything hard and that he should be given whatever he wants, phones, cars, anything, and he's reaching adulthood. Well, what's going to happen? How is he going to take responsibility for himself? Will he take responsibility for himself? What are his relationships going to be like with other people? What's a marriage going to be like? Is he going to have to marry a person who's just used to serving an emotional bully? Because that's what's going to happen unless he gets an opportunity to mature somehow. Taking full responsibility for yourself is a maturing process. It doesn't have to be a lonely process. Parents can work through that with their children. Teaching self-government helps them. They need adult skills, things that they can utilize in order to strengthen them, lift them, and help them decode some of these emotions and things that are going on around them. That's what teaching self-government does. It prepares them for success. It is very different because the focus is self-government, which is a principle that applies to everyone, and it is not an entitled principle. It's a very proactive leadership empowerment principle. I would love to teach you more about that. I have a full-length class that's on this channel. It's called The Not So Known Secret for Parenting Success. If you go to that right now, you'll learn a lot of the skills and principles of self-government. You can see for yourself what I'm talking about. Also, there's a free gift at the end of that video, so be sure to stay to the end. I'll see you there.